Right now, if you spend 1 hour completely alone, you might feel a flicker of unease creeping into your mind. Yet, for most of human history, being physically alone almost never meant being emotionally alone at all. Ancient humans rarely experienced loneliness the way you and I experience it inside our modern, isolated lives today. What if the crushing loneliness so many people feel now is actually a very recent invention of civilization itself? For nearly 200,000 years, our ancestors lived, ate, slept, and grieved surrounded by the same small group of people. Archaeologists and anthropologists have spent decades studying whether early humans even had a concept resembling modern loneliness at all. The answer they keep finding is stranger and more unsettling than most people ever expect to hear. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why modern loneliness feels so unnatural to the human brain. You will also discover what ancient survival groups did the moment someone in their tribe began to withdraw or isolate. And you will see why some researchers now believe loneliness itself might be one of the clearest warning signs of a sick society. This topic matters right now because loneliness has quietly become one of the biggest public health concerns in the modern world. Researchers in several countries have started calling chronic loneliness an epidemic, comparing its health risks to smoking cigarettes daily. That comparison sounds dramatic, but several long-term studies have linked prolonged isolation to real, measurable increases in early death. So scientists began asking an obvious but overlooked question, wondering how our ancestors managed to avoid this problem for so long. What they found by studying hunter-gatherer societies and small-scale traditional communities completely reshaped how we think about human connection. Later in this video, I will explain why your brain still reacts to loneliness almost as if it were a physical injury. I will also explain how ancient rites of passage were designed specifically to prevent people from ever feeling forgotten. And I will show you what a real hunter-gatherer camp actually looked like on an ordinary evening thousands of years ago. Many people assume that ancient life must have been lonelier than modern life, simply because it looked so much harder. It's easy to picture a single caveman alone in the wilderness, fighting for survival against a hostile, empty landscape. That image comes almost entirely from movies, cartoons, and popular culture, rather than from actual archaeological evidence. In reality, solitary survival was so dangerous for early humans that it was almost never a viable long-term strategy at all. Anthropologists studying groups like the Hadza in Tanzania have found that people almost never sleep, eat, or travel completely alone. The Hadza are one of the last remaining hunter-gatherer societies, still living in ways that resemble our distant ancestors. Their daily life revolves entirely around a group, usually between 20 and 40 people, who share food, shelter, and decisions together. This constant physical closeness wasn't a lifestyle choice, it was a strict requirement for staying alive in a dangerous world. But here's what most people don't realize. Closeness like this did far more than just keep our ancestors physically safe. Early human survival depended on something researchers now call cooperative breeding, a concept that surprises most people the first time they hear it. Cooperative breeding means that children were not raised only by their biological parents, but by the entire surrounding group. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, and unrelated adults all took turns feeding, teaching, and protecting the children of the tribe. This meant that from birth, every single person was wrapped inside a dense web of relationships that never fully let go. A child growing up this way rarely, if ever, experienced the deep sense of being truly on their own. Modern nuclear families, where only one or two parents raise children with little outside help, are actually a fairly recent development. Historians estimate that this smaller family structure only became common within roughly the last few hundred years, mostly in industrial societies. So the isolated modern household many of us grew up inside is closer to a social experiment than to our natural default. Imagine a small group of early humans gathered tightly around a fire as darkness settles over the grassland outside their camp. Children lie curled against the warm bodies of aunts, cousins, and older siblings, all pressed together beneath a single shared shelter. An elder begins speaking slowly, recounting a story about a hunt that happened many years before any of the children were born. Every single person in that circle is physically touching at least one other person as the story continues into the night. This wasn't simply comfort or convenience. It was one of the ways early humans regulated fear, stress, and physical pain together. Modern research on touch and human physiology shows that physical closeness can lower cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. In other words, our ancestors were unknowingly practicing a form of medicine every single night, simply by sleeping close together. There's something even stranger almost nobody talks about, and it involves what happened when a person actually did become isolated. Anthropological records from small-scale societies around the world show that prolonged voluntary isolation was treated as a serious warning sign. If someone began withdrawing from the group for an extended period, it was rarely ignored or dismissed as a personal choice. In many cultures, elders or shamans, the spiritual and healing leaders of the tribe, would intervene directly and ask questions. A shaman's role often included diagnosing not just physical illness, but also social and emotional distress within the community. Isolation itself was frequently interpreted almost like a fever, a clear symptom signaling that something deeper needed attention. This stands in sharp contrast to many modern societies, where withdrawing from others is often seen as simply a private matter. Today, someone can go days or even weeks without meaningful human contact before anyone else even notices they are struggling. In most ancestral communities, that same silence would likely have triggered concern within a matter of hours, not weeks. Rites of passage offer another powerful example of how ancient societies actively prevented people from ever feeling forgotten or unseen. A rite of passage is a structured ritual marking a major life transition, such as moving from childhood into adulthood. These ceremonies almost always required the presence and active participation of the entire community, not just close family members. Anthropologists studying these rituals argue that they served a psychological function reaching far beyond simple tradition or celebration. By publicly witnessing someone's transformation, the group was effectively telling that individual that their existence truly mattered to everyone. Modern psychologists now recognize that feeling witnessed and acknowledged by others is a core human need, not a luxury. Yet in much of modern life, major milestones like graduations, career changes, or personal struggles often pass by with little collective recognition. But here's the part that changes how you might see your own daily life, and it comes down to simple biology. Your brain did not evolve inside a world of private apartments, individual bedrooms, or scrolling silently through a phone screen alone. It evolved inside small, tightly connected groups where survival itself depended entirely on constant cooperation and physical proximity to others. Neuroscientists have found that social pain and physical pain activate strikingly similar regions inside the human brain. This means that when you feel genuinely lonely, your brain may be reacting almost as if you were physically injured. From an evolutionary standpoint, this response likely developed as a survival alarm, warning early humans that isolation meant real danger. Being separated from the group as a hunter-gatherer often meant a much higher risk of starvation, predators, or sudden death. So loneliness was never meant to be a quiet background feeling that you simply learn to live with over time. It was designed as an urgent internal signal, pushing you to seek out connection again as quickly as possible. Death and grief reveal another side of this ancient system, one that many people never think to consider. In most traditional societies, death was never a private event handled quietly behind closed doors, far from the community. The entire group would gather around the dying person, ensuring nobody ever faced their final moments truly alone. Mourning itself was often a shared, public ritual, spread across many days and carried out collectively by the whole tribe. This meant that grief, one of the most isolating emotions a person can feel, was carried by many shoulders instead of one. Modern grief, by contrast, is frequently experienced in private, with mourners returning to work or daily life within just days. Some psychologists now argue that this shift toward private, rushed grieving may actually intensify feelings of isolation during loss. Modern researchers have begun studying whether reconnecting people with close-knit, tribe-like communities can actually reverse some effects of chronic loneliness. Some public health programs are now experimenting with community-based living models, deliberately inspired by traditional hunter-gatherer social structures. Early results from several of these programs suggest measurable improvements in mental well-being among participants who join structured group activities. Researchers studying so-called blue zones, regions where people commonly live past 100 years old, consistently highlight strong social bonds as a key factor. In places like Okinawa in Japan, tightly connected social support groups called moai have existed for generations, offering lifelong companionship. Members of a moai commit to supporting one another emotionally, financially, and socially, often from childhood until old age. This ancient-inspired system stands in stark contrast to how many modern adults quietly navigate life with few close, reliable connections. So when you look back across nearly 200,000 years of human history, one pattern becomes impossible to ignore. For almost the entire story of our species, humans lived, slept, ate, and grieved surrounded by a tightly bonded group. Isolation was rare and dangerous, treated as a serious warning sign rather than something to quietly endure alone. Elders and shamans watched closely for withdrawal, while rites of passage ensured that nobody's life transitions went unnoticed. Cooperative breeding meant that children were raised by an entire community, never truly standing alone from the very beginning. Even death and grief were shared burdens, carried collectively rather than left for one person to bear in silence. Modern loneliness, then, is not a sign that something is wrong specifically with you as an individual person. It may simply be your ancient brain reacting honestly to a modern world it was never actually designed for. Understanding this doesn't erase the pain of loneliness, but it can completely reframe how you interpret that feeling. It is not weakness, it is your biology sending an old and honest message about a very real human need. If this video helped you see your own need for connection in a completely new light, consider subscribing for more. There are many more forgotten pieces of ancient wisdom waiting to be uncovered, each one connected to how we live today. Leave a comment below sharing which part of ancient human connection surprised you the most while watching this video. And if you know someone who has been feeling isolated lately, consider sharing this video as a small, simple way to reach out.